To understand why tensions between Iran and Israel run so deep today, you have to look far beyond the headlines of missiles, drones, and military threats. The roots of this conflict stretch back decades, shaped by ideology, power struggles, shifting alliances, and a battle over influence in the Middle East. What we see today is not just a sudden crisis. It is the result of years of mistrust, rivalry, and competing visions for the region's future. In the early years after Israel was founded in 1948, the relationship between Iran and Israel was not openly hostile. In fact, during the rule of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, Iran quietly maintained diplomatic and economic ties with Israel. The Shah saw Israel as a strategic partner against Arab nationalism and Soviet influence in the region. At that time, Iran was closely aligned with Western powers, particularly the United States, and its foreign policy reflected those alliances. Trade, intelligence cooperation, and limited diplomatic contact existed between the two nations. While the relationship was not fully public due to regional sensitivities, it was stable enough that both sides benefited from economic and security cooperation. For a time, the idea of Iran and Israel becoming bitter enemies would have seemed unlikely. Everything changed in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution. The revolution dramatically reshaped Iran's political system and foreign policy. The monarchy was overthrown, and a new Islamic republic was established under the leadership of Ruhollah Khomeini. This new leadership introduced a completely different worldview, one that strongly opposed Western influence and rejected Israel's legitimacy as a state. The revolutionary government framed its ideology around resistance against what it described as oppression and imperialism. In that narrative, Israel became one of the central symbols of those forces. Iranian leaders began referring to Israel as an occupying power and expressed strong support for the Palestinian cause. This shift turned Israel from a quiet regional partner into one of Iran's most prominent adversaries. From that moment forward, the relationship between the two countries moved into a state of deep hostility. Diplomatic ties were severed, Israeli representatives were expelled from Tehran, and the Israeli embassy was handed over to representatives of the Palestinian movement. This symbolic act showed the dramatic reversal in Iran's foreign policy direction. As the years passed, the rivalry evolved into what many analysts call a shadow war. Instead of engaging in direct military battles, both sides began competing through indirect strategies. Iran built alliances with armed groups and political movements across the Middle East, many of which opposed Israel and Western influence. Among the most notable of these groups is Hezbollah, which emerged in Lebanon during the 1980s and received strong backing from Iran. Through these relationships, Iran expanded its influence in multiple parts of the region, including Lebanon, Syria. Support often included funding, training, and weapons. For Iran, these alliances were seen as a strategic way to challenge Israel and project power beyond its borders without engaging in direct warfare. Israel, on the other hand, viewed this growing network as a major security threat. Israeli leaders argued that Iran's strategy aimed to surround Israel with hostile forces capable of launching attacks at any time. This perception reinforced Israel's determination to counter Iran's influence wherever possible. Another major source of tension has been Iran's nuclear program. Israel has long feared that Iran could develop nuclear weapons, something Israeli officials say would pose an existential threat to the country's survival. Iran insists that its nuclear activities are for peaceful purposes, such as energy production and scientific research. But the issue has remained one of the most contentious points in the relationship between the two states. Because of these fears, Israel has repeatedly warned that it will not allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons capability. This has led to years of covert operations, cyber conflicts, intelligence battles, and alleged sabotage targeting nuclear facilities and military infrastructure. Each side accuses the other of aggression, deepening the cycle of mistrust and retaliation. At the same time, regional politics have made the situation even more complicated. The Middle East is a region where alliances shift quickly and where conflicts often overlap. Rivalries between Sunni and Shia powers, disputes over territory, and struggles for political influence all contribute to an environment where tensions can escalate rapidly. Iran sees itself as a defender of certain ideological and political causes in the region, including resistance movements that oppose Israel. Israel sees itself as defending its sovereignty and security against a network of adversaries supported by Iran. Both sides believe their actions are necessary for survival and protection. Over decades, these competing narratives have hardened public opinion and shaped national identity on both sides. Generations have grown up hearing about the threats posed by the other. Political leaders, military planners, and regional allies all factor this rivalry into their long-term strategies. This deep historical background explains why the conflict between Iran and Israel is not simply about one event or one political disagreement. It is built on layers of history, ideology, security fears, and regional power struggles that have developed over many years. The tensions visible today are connected to decisions, revolutions, alliances, and conflicts that have shaped the Middle East for nearly half a century. For many years, the confrontation between Iran and Israel existed mostly in the shadows. It was a conflict rarely declared openly, but constantly unfolding through covert operations, intelligence missions, cyberattacks, and proxy battles across the Middle East. Both nations understood the risks of direct war. So instead they fought in ways that allowed them to weaken each other without triggering a full-scale regional conflict. This hidden struggle became widely known as a shadow war. Unlike conventional wars fought with large armies on battlefields, a shadow war relies on secrecy, strategy, and influence. Intelligence agencies, cyber units, special forces, and allied groups often become the main actors. Operations happen quietly, sometimes without official acknowledgement, yet their impact can shape the balance of power across entire regions. One of the central elements of this shadow conflict was the use of proxy groups. Iran expanded its influence by supporting armed movements and militias across the Middle East. These groups often shared ideological or political goals, aligned with Iran's vision of resisting Israel and Western influence in the region. Among the most prominent of these groups is Hezbollah, which developed into a powerful force in Lebanon with military capabilities that rival those of many national armies. Through financial assistance, weapons transfers, training programs, and strategic coordination, Iran strengthened these groups over time. The goal was not only ideological solidarity but also strategic positioning. By building alliances in neighboring regions, Iran created layers of influence that could pressure Israel without direct Iranian forces crossing borders. Israel saw this growing network as a major strategic threat. Israeli leaders argued that Iran was trying to surround Israel with hostile forces capable of launching attacks from multiple directions. Hezbollah's large rocket arsenal in Lebanon, combined with other allied groups operating in Syria and beyond, created a security concern that Israeli officials repeatedly warned about. To counter this expanding influence, Israel launched numerous covert and military operations designed to slow Iran's regional expansion. Israeli airstrikes frequently targeted weapons shipments, military bases, and infrastructure believed to be connected to Iranian forces or their allies. Many of these operations occurred in Syria, where Iran had increased its presence during the country's long civil war. These strikes were often precise and limited in scope, aiming to send a clear message while avoiding a wider escalation. Israel rarely sought to destroy entire cities or launch large-scale invasions. Instead, the strategy focused on disrupting supply routes, destroying advanced weapons systems, and preventing Iran from establishing permanent military bases near Israeli borders. At the same time, the shadow war extended far beyond traditional battlefields. Cyber warfare became another powerful tool in the rivalry. Both countries possess advanced technological capabilities, and cyber operations allowed them to target critical infrastructure, intelligence systems, and strategic facilities without firing a single missile. These digital attacks often remained unconfirmed publicly, yet security experts widely believed they were part of the ongoing struggle between the two powers. Another key arena in the shadow conflict involved Iran's nuclear program. Israel has consistently expressed concern that Iran could develop nuclear weapons capability. Iranian officials have repeatedly stated that their nuclear program is intended for peaceful purposes, but the issue remains one of the most sensitive and controversial aspects of their rivalry. Because of these concerns, Israel allegedly carried out covert operations aimed at slowing or disrupting Iran's nuclear progress. These actions reportedly included cyberattacks on nuclear facilities, sabotage operations, and intelligence missions designed to gather crucial information about Iran's technological development. Such operations demonstrated how far the shadow war had extended into highly sensitive and strategic areas. Despite the intensity of these activities, both sides carefully avoided crossing a certain line. Direct large-scale attacks between Iran and Israel remained rare for many years because both governments understood the potential consequences. A direct confrontation between them could quickly pull other countries into the conflict and destabilize the entire Middle East. However, the situation gradually began to shift. As tensions grew and regional conflicts intensified, the gap between covert confrontation and open warfare started to narrow. Military incidents became more frequent, and retaliatory actions became more visible. What once happened quietly in secret operations increasingly moved into the public eye through missile strikes, drone attacks, and open military threats. Regional instability also contributed to this transformation. Wars and political crises in places like Syria and Iraq created opportunities for both Iran and Israel to expand their activities. Military forces, intelligence units, and allied groups often operated in close proximity, increasing the chances of direct confrontation. As these encounters multiplied, the risk of miscalculation rose dramatically. A single strike could trigger retaliation, and retaliation could lead to escalation. Each side watched the other carefully, interpreting every action as either a warning or a provocation. Over time, the shadow war began evolving into something more visible and dangerous. Operations that once remained hidden started becoming openly acknowledged. Missiles and drones replaced secret sabotage in some cases, signaling a shift from quiet rivalry toward more direct confrontation. The conflict that had lived in the shadows for decades was increasingly stepping into the light, transforming the nature of the struggle between Iran and Israel and reshaping the security landscape of the entire Middle East. The conflict between Iran and Israel rarely stays limited to just two nations. The Middle East is one of the most interconnected and politically complex regions in the world, where alliances, rivalries, religious divisions, and strategic interests overlap across borders. When tensions rise between two powerful regional actors like Iran and Israel, the effects ripple outward quickly, pulling other countries, organizations, and armed groups into the confrontation. One of the main reasons the conflict spreads across the region is the network of alliances and partnerships built over many decades. Iran has developed strong relationships with several political movements and militias throughout the Middle East. These alliances are often based on shared ideology, strategic cooperation, and opposition to Israel's policies in the region. Many of these groups receive financial support, military training, or weapons from Iran, strengthening their ability to operate in conflicts that extend beyond national boundaries. Among the most well-known of these groups is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Over the years, Hezbollah has developed a significant military force with rockets, missiles, and trained fighters. Because of its close ties with Iran and its location near Israel's northern border, Hezbollah plays a central role in the regional dynamics of the Iran-Israel rivalry. Any major escalation between Iran and Israel could quickly involve Hezbollah due to its strategic position and long-standing hostility toward Israel. Another region affected by this rivalry is Syria. During the long and devastating conflict known as the Syrian Civil War, Iran supported the Syrian government with military advisors, equipment, and allied fighters. This support helped Iran strengthen its presence inside Syrian territory. Israel viewed this development with serious concern because it feared that Iran could use Syrian territory to move weapons, establish military infrastructure, or open new fronts against Israel. As a result, Syria became one of the most active arenas in the broader Iran-Israel confrontation. Israeli airstrikes have frequently targeted sites believed to be connected to Iranian forces or weapons shipments in Syria. These operations are often described as preventive actions aimed at stopping advanced weapons from reaching groups that could threaten Israeli territory. The situation in Syria demonstrates how the internal conflicts of one country can become deeply entangled with the strategic rivalry of regional powers. Iraq has also become part of this wider geopolitical environment. After years of war and political instability, Iraq hosts a variety of armed factions and political movements, some of which maintain close relations with Iran. These groups operate within Iraq's complicated political and security landscape, sometimes becoming involved in broader regional tensions. Their presence adds another layer of complexity to the conflict, as actions in Iraq can influence the balance of power between Iran and its adversaries. Farther south, the conflict's influence reaches into Yemen, where the country has faced a long and devastating war involving multiple regional actors. The armed movement known as Houthi movement has been involved in this conflict for years, and is widely believed by many international observers to receive support from Iran. Although the Yemeni conflict has its own internal causes and dynamics, it also intersects with the broader struggle for influence between regional powers. Because Yemen sits near important global shipping routes, instability there can affect international trade and maritime security. When tensions escalate across the Middle East, areas like the Red Sea and nearby waterways become strategically important. Attacks on shipping or military activity near these routes can draw global attention and involve countries far beyond the immediate region. Another factor that pulls the entire Middle East into the conflict is the network of political alliances between governments. Many Arab states have historically opposed Iran's growing regional influence. Some of these countries see Iran's support for armed groups as a threat to their own security and political stability. As a result, they often align themselves more closely with countries that share their concerns about Iran's regional ambitions. At the same time, the Palestinian issue remains a deeply emotional and political topic across the Middle East. Iran has long positioned itself as a supporter of Palestinian resistance movements, including Hamas. Because Israel's conflict with Palestinian groups frequently sparks strong reactions across the region, it can easily amplify tensions between Israel and Iran as well. Public opinion in many Middle Eastern countries also plays a role in shaping how governments respond to these conflicts. When violence escalates, protests, political pressure, and media narratives can influence the decisions of leaders who must balance domestic expectations with international diplomacy. This dynamic often pushes governments to take stronger positions or become more involved in regional disputes. The geography of the Middle East also contributes to the spread of conflict. Many countries in the region share borders, cultural ties, and historical relationships that make it difficult for wars to remain isolated. Refugee flows, economic disruptions, and cross-border security concerns quickly affect neighboring states whenever violence escalates. Energy resources and global trade routes add another layer of significance. Several Middle Eastern countries are major producers of oil and natural gas, and the region contains vital shipping corridors that connect Asia, Europe, and Africa. Any conflict that threatens these routes can attract the attention of international powers and further complicate the regional situation. All these factors create an environment where a conflict between two nations rarely stays contained. Alliances, proxy groups, strategic locations, ideological commitments, and economic interests link countries across the Middle East in ways that make regional escalation more likely. Whenever tensions rise between Iran and Israel, the confrontation between Iran and Israel is often described as a regional conflict, but its consequences reach far beyond the borders of the Middle East. The stakes tied to this rivalry are deeply connected to global security, energy markets, international alliances, and the stability of the world economy. When tensions rise between these two powerful actors, governments, markets, and military forces across the globe begin to pay close attention. One of the most significant reasons the conflict carries global importance is the Middle East's role in the world's energy supply. Several countries in the region are among the largest producers and exporters of oil and natural gas. Any disruption to these resources can quickly affect energy prices worldwide. Industries, transportation systems, and national economies depend heavily on stable access to these fuels, making the region strategically important for many countries. A particularly critical location within this energy network is the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow passage connects the Persian Gulf to international waters and serves as one of the most important shipping routes for oil exports. A significant portion of the world's petroleum supply passes through this corridor every day. Because Iran lies along this strategic waterway, any military escalation involving Iran has the potential to threaten shipping traffic in the area. If tensions escalate to the point where shipping lanes are blocked or heavily threatened, the effects could be felt immediately in global markets. Oil prices could rise sharply, leading to increased transportation costs, higher prices for goods, and economic pressure on countries that rely heavily on imported energy. Financial markets often react quickly to instability in the Middle East because investors recognize how closely global economic stability is tied to energy flows from the region. The global stakes are also shaped by the involvement of powerful international actors. The United States has long been one of Israel's closest allies, providing diplomatic support, military assistance, and strategic cooperation. American forces maintain a significant presence across the Middle East, including military bases, naval fleets, and security partnerships with several regional governments. This presence reflects the importance the United States places on maintaining stability and protecting international trade routes in the region. On the other side of the geopolitical landscape, countries like Russia and China also have strategic interests in the Middle East. Both nations maintain diplomatic and economic ties with Iran and have worked to expand their influence in regional affairs. Russia, in particular, has played a major role in Middle Eastern politics through its involvement in the Syrian civil war, where it supported the Syrian government alongside Iranian forces. China's involvement is often focused on economic cooperation, trade routes, and long-term energy partnerships. As one of the world's largest energy consumers, China relies heavily on stable oil supplies from the Middle East. Any conflict that threatens shipping lanes or production facilities can affect China's economic planning and industrial stability. Because of these interests, major global powers often monitor developments in the Iran-Israel rivalry very closely. Another critical factor in the global stakes is the question of nuclear technology and weapons proliferation. Israel has long expressed concern that Iran could eventually develop nuclear weapons capability. Iranian leaders have consistently stated that their nuclear program is designed for peaceful purposes, including energy production and scientific research. Despite these assurances, the issue remains one of the most controversial topics in international diplomacy. Concerns about nuclear development are closely tied to international agreements, such as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This agreement was designed to limit Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for relief from economic sanctions. Although the agreement was once seen as a major diplomatic breakthrough, disagreements over its terms and implementation have kept the issue at the center of global political debate. The possibility of nuclear escalation adds a serious layer of risk to the conflict. If nuclear capabilities were ever introduced into the rivalry between Iran and Israel, the strategic balance of the entire Middle East could change dramatically. Other countries in the region might pursue their own nuclear programs out of fear or competition, potentially creating a wider arms race that could destabilize global security. Global trade routes represent another major stake tied to the conflict. Beyond oil shipments, the Middle East sits at the crossroads of several major maritime and land transportation corridors connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. Commercial vessels carrying electronics, machinery, raw materials, and consumer goods pass through these routes daily. Disruptions caused by military confrontations, naval blockades, or attacks on shipping infrastructure could slow international trade and increase logistical costs. Insurance premiums for shipping companies often rise whenever tensions escalate in key maritime regions. Companies must factor in the possibility of attacks, delays, or route changes, which can increase the price of transporting goods. These costs can eventually spread through the global supply chain, influencing prices for everyday products in countries far removed from the Middle East. Humanitarian consequences also contribute to the global significance of the conflict. Wars in the Middle East have historically produced large refugee movements, with millions of people forced to leave their homes in search of safety. Neighboring countries often carry the initial burden of providing shelter and support, but international organizations and distant nations frequently become involved in humanitarian assistance efforts. Large refugee crises can reshape political discussions in many parts of the world, particularly in regions that receive migrants fleeing violence. Governments must address housing, employment, and integration challenges while balancing domestic political pressures. These issues demonstrate how conflicts in one part of the world can influence social and political dynamics in distant countries. Diplomatic relationships between nations can also be affected by the rivalry between Iran and Israel. Governments often face difficult choices about alliances, economic cooperation, and security commitments when tensions escalate. Some countries attempt to mediate disputes, while others align themselves more strongly with one side or the other based on strategic interests and political priorities. Military planning across several continents often takes the Iran-Israel conflict into account as well. Naval patrols, air defense systems, and intelligence monitoring increase whenever the risk of escalation rises. Defense alliances coordinate strategies to prepare for potential crises that could threaten regional stability or international shipping routes. These interconnected factors reveal why the conflict carries significance far beyond the borders of the two nations directly involved. Energy markets, military alliances, nuclear diplomacy, trade networks, humanitarian concerns, and geopolitical rivalries all intersect in the Middle East, creating a situation where developments between Iran and Israel can influence political and economic decisions across the entire world.